Today we're going to start Chapter 7. We're talking about market structures. There are 4 market structures we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about perfect competition and monopolies and monopolistic competition and oligopolies. That last word is really fun to say, oligopoly. So let's start out in section 7.1, which is perfect competition and monopoly. First of all, let's talk about just what we're going through today. So firms in perfect competition market a single product that is identical. In this situation, consumers base their buying decisions solely on price. Monopolies, however, are single producers of a product that has no close substitute. Consumers are forced to buy this product from its single producer or go without. This gives the producer power to charge higher prices without losing many sales. So we can all think about businesses that we know that are examples of firms in perfect competition or firms that are considered a monopoly. Now let's look at our slides. So first, perfect competition monopoly. The 3 learning objectives are identify the features of perfect competition, describe the barriers to entry that can create a monopoly, and compare the market structures of monopoly and perfect competition in terms of price and quantity. So perfect competition. First, like market structure. That's what our whole chapter is over. What does market structure mean? Market structure describes the important characteristics or features of a market. So we're going to be talking about 4 markets, and we need to know the characteristics and features of those 4 markets. That's our goal of this chapter. First of all, perfect competition. Perfectly competitive markets are assumed to have the following features. If we go in here, these are the features of all markets. So these are the questions we ask each other when we're talking about markets. So number 1, number of buyers and sellers. A perfect competition has many buyers and sellers, so many that each buys or sells only a tiny fraction of the total market output. Okay, number 2, products uniformity across suppliers. For perfect competition, the firms produce a standardized product or a commodity. A commodity is a product that is identical across suppliers, such as bushels of wheat, a bushel of corn, or a share of Google stock. Number 3, ease of entry into the market. Firms can easily enter or leave the industry. There are no obstacles preventing new firms from entering profitable markets or preventing existing firms from leaving unprofitable markets. And number 4, forms of competition among firms. For perfect competition, buyers are fully informed about the price, quality, and availability of the products. And sellers are fully informed about the availability of all resources and technology. Nope, going backwards, sorry. There we go. If these conditions exist in a market, individual buyers and sellers have no control over the price. Price is determined by market demand and market supply. Talk about Chapter 6, everything with supply and demand. Next, a perfectly competitive firm is so small relative to the size of the market that the firm's quantity decision has no effect on the market price. Skip through that. There we go. Examples of perfectly competitive markets. These include markets for shares of large corporations such as Google or General Electric, markets for foreign exchange like yen, euros, and pounds. It also includes markets for most agricultural products like livestock, corn, and wheat. We know this because we just said that perfect competition, they produce a standardized product. It's identical across suppliers. All wheat is the same, all corn is the same, all livestock is the same. So it's perfectly competitive. Also, there are so many buyers and sellers that the actions of one cannot influence the market price. thousands of wheat farmers in Kansas together grow less than 3% of the world's supply of wheat. No single wheat farmer can influence the market price of wheat. Market price. Once market price is established, each farmer can sell however much he or she wants to sell at that market price. So again, each farm is so small relative to the market that each has no impact on the market price. All farmers produce identical products. Any farmer who charges more than the market price isn't going to sell a darn thing. Farms are free to charge less than the market price, but why would they do that? If they can charge the market price and make more money, they're going to charge the market price. If they charge less, of course people are going to buy it, but they're not going to make as much money. The demand curve facing an individual farmer is, therefore, a horizontal line drawn at the market price. So basically, in perfect competition, there is no competition. So what we need to remember about perfect competition is the four key features: many buyers and sellers, standardized product, no barriers to entry, and buyers and sellers are informed of the price, quality, and availability. So in perfect competition, there is no competition. Why do I have 3 apples on this screen? Well, let's talk about it. All right, a homeowner is looking for someone to do yard work and placed a classified ad in a community newspaper. 10 potential workers answered the ad. All were equally qualified and motivated. Each of these potential workers was acting like a business that is in perfect competition. They all offered the same service, so the only difference to the consumer was the price. The homeowner likely hired the worker who was willing to work for the lowest pay. Okay, now to the apples. These apples, they are exactly the same. So imagine you're hungry and you want to buy one of these apples. Do you care where the apples are grown? Okay, each apple came from a different farmer, and there are at least 100 similar apples you could buy from other farmers at the local market. How would you choose among the apples? Okay, how would you choose? Well, if they're exactly the same, I would choose the cheapest apple. If it's cheap enough, I'd just buy 2. So yes, you would choose the apple with the lowest price if there were any difference in the price. These are all identical products. This is perfect competition. You're going to buy the one that's the cheapest. This situation demonstrates firms in perfect competition. Because consumers see no difference among the products, they care only about price when they choose which apple to buy. What would happen to a farmer who attempted to charge more for apples than the other farmers? You wouldn't buy it, right? No one would buy from this farmer because apples can be produced for less from other farmers. Makes perfect sense for perfect competition. All right, let's move on to Monopoly. Monopoly is a game that we love to play. It takes a really long time, but it's also the sole supplier of a product with no close substitutes. Monopoly has something called market power, which is the ability of a firm to raise its price without losing all sales to rivals. Why, you may ask? Well, because there are no rivals, right? So with Monopoly, there are barriers to entry. That's one of the features of a monopoly. Barriers to entry. So barriers to entry means there are restrictions on the entry of new firms to an industry. There can be 3 types of restrictions. Legal restrictions, which means a government can prevent new firms from entering a market by making entry illegal. The economies of scale. A single firm can sometimes satisfy market demand at a lower average cost per unit than could 2 or more smaller firms. That would include a natural monopoly and a geographic monopoly. For example, on the economies of scale, the transmission of electricity involves economies of scale. Once wires are run throughout a community, the cost of linking additional households to the power grid is relatively small. The cost per household declines as more and more households are wired into the system. Also, natural monopolies. A new entrant cannot sell enough output to experience the economies of scale enjoyed by an established natural monopolist. So entry into the market is naturally blocked. So in less populated areas, natural monopolies include the only grocery store, the only movie theater, or the only restaurant for miles around. These are geographic monopolies. So if you live in a small town, you know, or if you've ever been to a small town, very few restaurants to choose from, very few grocery stores to choose from, etc. That would be a geographic monopoly. Your last feature of a barrier to entry would be the control of essential resources. Sometimes the source of monopoly power is a firm's control over some resource critical to production. For example, for decades, Alcoa, which is a company, controlled the world's supply of bauxite, the key raw material in aluminum. So that would be, if they had all the bauxite, then no one else can make aluminum, right? Another control of essential resource would be professional sports team is so a key resource for any professional sports team is a large stadium. Pro teams typically sign exclusive long-term leases for stadiums in major cities. These leases help block the formation of another league in the sport because they're not going to build another large stadium. So any essential resources will block companies from getting into a market because they can't come up with, the legal restrictions or the essential resources. Monopolists may not earn a profit, which is crazy. But because a monopoly, by definition, supplies the entire market, the demand curve for a monopolist's output also is the market demand curve. So the demand curve for a monopolist's output is also the market demand curve. Even a monopolist with ironclad barriers to entry may go broke. Although a monopolist is the sole supplier of a good with no close substitutes, the demand for that good may not be great enough to keep the firm in business. They may not be able to make a profit because there isn't enough demand for their product. Let's see. For example, if you have an invention, and an invention is always protected from direct competition by patents, so nobody else can make that product, yet most patented products never get produced because nobody wants them, and many that are produced fail to attract enough customers to survive. So that would be an example of a monopolist that doesn't earn a profit. They've invented something they think is really darn awesome, but nobody else wants it. True monopolies are rare. Long-lasting monopolies are rare because a profitable monopoly attracts competitors and substitutes. The rail industry was a true monopoly until trucking industry was born. Long-distance telephones were a true monopoly until wireless came around and we all got cell phones, right? Hey, another apple. Why did I put that there? So this time I see one apple. And there are no other apples or fruits available anywhere. How much could the owner of this apple charge? Right? It's the only apple, and we all love apples. So how much could the owner of this apple charge? Well, they could charge whatever they wanted, right? It's the only apple out there. So they're going to charge as much as they want, and depending on how bad you want that apple, you may or may not buy it. Right? So that would be an example of a monopoly. Super Bowl, what's that have to do with anything? Well, let's talk about a pretend scenario. This guy Clay is desperate to attend the Super Bowl. His favorite team is playing and he's willing to pay almost any price to attend the sold-out game. 2 days before the game, Clay meets Vivian. She has a ticket and is willing to sell it for $500. Will Clay pay $500 for the ticket? And if he will, why? If Clay decides not to buy the ticket, will Vivian be able to sell a ticket to someone else? Yeah, Vivian's the only supplier that Clay knows about. There are no close substitutes. Even if Clay doesn't buy the ticket, Vivian is going to be able to find someone willing to pay $500 or more because of monopoly power. Learning objective 3, monopoly and efficiency. Monopolies are not guaranteed a profit. We talked about that in learning objective 2. Monopolies can lose money. We talked about that in learning objective 2 also. Monopolies are relatively rare, and we talked about that too. So let's get into the details. Okay, what's the difference between monopoly and perfect competition? So competition forces firms to be efficient. That is, to produce the maximum possible output at the lowest possible price. Successful monopolist typically charges more than competitive firms do. Fewer consumers can afford the product. What if one firm buys up all the individual firms in the perfectly competitive market, creating a giant monopoly? The market demand curve becomes the monopolist's demand curve. Suppose the average cost per unit is the same with monopoly as with perfect competition. What we can say for sure is that a monopoly supplies less output at a higher price than would a perfectly competitive market. To maximize profit, the monopolist restricts quantity and increases the price. Crazy. Other problems with monopoly. Monopolies may reduce social welfare for other reasons besides higher prices to consumers. These include possible waste of resources and inefficiencies that may develop in their operation. Mistake number 1. That's not so bad. Resources are wasted securing monopoly privilege. Monopolies may have too much influence on the political system, which they use to protect and strengthen their monopoly power. Lawyers' fees, lobbying expenses, and other costs associated with gaining a special privilege from government are largely a social waste because they use up scarce resources but add not 1 unit to the output. I don't know if you guys know what lobbying is. There are people in the United States that get paid to try to convince other people to do stuff. Like, that is their job. They get paid usually a lot of money to convince politicians to do things, to convince important people to do things. Like, that is their sole purpose, is to win important people over to their side or to their thought process or to what they want to do. That's what lobbyists do. Monopolies may grow inefficient. The monopolist, insulated from the rigors of market competition, could grow fat and lazy and thus become inefficient. Executives might waste resources by creating a more comfortable life for themselves. So there's no competition. Executives have no drive to reduce expenses, to increase profits. It's inefficiency. For example, lavish salaries and company perks could boost the average cost of production above the competition level. Monopolists also have been criticized for being slow to adopt the latest production techniques. There's another typo. Hey, that's 2. Reluctant to develop new products and generally lacking in innovation. Wouldn't you hate to be described as that person? Why monopolies might not be so bad. For several reasons, some monopolies may not be as socially wasteful as we just described. The economies of scale. If the economies of scale are substantial, a monopolist might be able to produce output at a lower average cost than competitive firms could. Therefore, the price, or at least the cost of production, could be lower with monopoly than with perfect competition. There's no example. Government regulation. Government intervention can increase social welfare by forcing a monopolist to lower the price and increase output. The government can either operate the monopoly itself, as it does with most urban transit systems, or it can regulate a privately owned monopoly, as it does with local phone services and electricity. Keeping prices low to avoid regulation. Monopolists might try to keep prices below the profit maximizing level to keep the government out of their business. Prices and profits of drug companies, which individually are monopoly suppliers of patented medicines, come under scrutiny from time to time by public officials who threaten to regulate drug prices. Drug firms might try to avoid such treatment by keeping prices below the level that would maximize profit. Ooh, number 3, unless you guys have seen more. Keeping prices low to prevent competition. A monopolist might keep the price below the profit maximizing level to avoid attracting competitors. For example, one time Alcoa was the only U.S. producer of aluminum. Industry observers claimed that the company kept prices and profits below their maximum to discourage the entry of new firms. Whoa, why is there a golf cart there? All right, let's talk about the golf cart. First, let's remember that monopolies have no effective competition for their products. In this situation, firms have little reason to be efficient because customers have only one alternative to paying the price the firm charges, doing without the product. That's their only alternative. For this reason, monopolies are not motivated to keep wage rates low, to avoid waste, to use resources effectively, or to invest in new technology. They are often able to pass on higher costs that result from inefficiency to customers through higher prices. Here's our scenario with a golf cart. The world's only golf cart producer has trouble keeping up with demand from golf courses that are willing to pay $5,000 per cart. I don't know if that's a lot of money or not. Seems like a lot of money, but the firm's workers are already well paid, but they are demanding a 10% raise, more vacation time, and a longer lunch period in their labor negotiations. If the firm refuses to grant these demands, there may be a strike that could interrupt production for weeks or even months. How would you respond to the workers' demands? How would they respond if there were 50 other golf cart manufacturers? So, what would we do? I guess, we'd have to agree to the workers' demands to avoid a strike because they're the only golf cart producer in the world. But we'd probably have to pass through those increased costs to the customers, right? We'd have to raise the price of the golf cart. Could the firm pass on increased costs to customers if it were a competitive market? No, couldn't. But it's a monopoly. You can pass all costs on because it's the only producer. The firm would be more likely to refuse the demands if it were a competitive market because you'd have to eat all the costs. All right, that was almost 24 minutes. But we are done with 7.1, moving on to 7.2 tomorrow. Nice work.